This is a shout out to the Saturday class, and in this video we're going to talk about the three pairs that I taught y'all. Quantitative versus qualitative, short-term versus long-term. What was the third one? That's right, attitudinal versus structural. And I've got some examples for you now that the rain has broken on this sunny, beautiful day here in San Marcos to help you with your rainy day makeup assignment. All right, here we go. 2, 3.
Hey, Saturday class!
Hey, Saturday class.
Hey, Saturday morning class. I got a review for you guys on the three different pairs that I taught you. The first one, if you remember, was long-term versus short-term. So if you're looking at your problem, let me use a red marker. If you're going to look at the problem, you want to look at it in terms of its long-term and short-term implications. So if you're looking at education, you may talk about the immediate need for kids to have good education, but you may also talk about that under long-term economic viability as far as finding a job, right? The other one I taught you guys is attitudinal versus structure. So remember how the kids back in the 1940s and 50s and 60s couldn't go to school. Why? Because of the laws, the rules, the ordinances of separate but equal. Those were structural barriers, right? And then we had Brown v. Board of Education that got passed. And then what happened? The attitudes are what kept those kids from being able to enter the school district. The third and final pair that I taught y'all is quantitative versus qualitative. So let me shut this door, I'm kind of loud. Hello. So the final one is qualitative versus quantitative. If you can find data of the body count, the number of people impacted, maybe there's financial implications. Anything with data like percentages, dollar amounts, that's all quantitative. Qualitative are things like human rights, privacy, democracy, things that you can't necessarily put on a tape measure and, ascertain. So once again, long-term versus short-term. This can be the problem that you're extrapolating, or it could be the solution that your specific group comes up. It could be attitudinal or structural. The mindset are attitudes, okay? The laws and the ordinances, the rules are structural. And then finally, quantitative, which you can verify through data, or qualitative, which is it's more abstract notions that we as Americans cherish. Let's break it down in terms of qualitative and quantitative. We could probably count the number of artifacts if they were careful to go through these artifacts, of how many artifacts we would be losing, whether they're scrapers or arrowheads. Maybe there's some Indian pottery and jewelry, of which I know they have found in other locations. Or we can talk about this on a quantitative level, a qualitative level. Or we can talk about this on a qualitative level, that it is wrong to destroy culture intrinsically on its own, because once we've lost those artifacts, they're gone forever, and that we should respect other cultures. So we can quantify how many artifacts we've lost, but we can also say that it's wrong in and of itself. We could also talk about it on the long term, the amount of dollars it would cost the taxpayer, or the short term, how someone's taxes may go up. I better leave now before I get in trouble. And students, by the way, it's state law. It's called a shovel test. Whenever you do a state improvement project, you use taxpayer money, and if you think there are artifacts under there, they have to do a quote-unquote shovel test to cut the land in at least in one section to see if there are artifacts. They haven't done that here. Now, if it's private property, the law allows them to do whatever they want. So anyway, just so you have backstory of what the definition of a shovel test is, let's go to another spot and I'll break down another one of those three concepts that we talked about. And in fact, if you think about it, it's an attitudinal barrier that the shovel test hasn't been conducted, because most people don't even know what a shovel test is besides me in town. that would be an attitudinal barrier. A structural barrier, the law says that you must have a shovel test, so there really isn't a barrier. The barrier is the workflow of TxDOT. I hope that helps. See how upset I get when I talk about this, y'all? Y'all, let's do another example of short-term, long-term. This time, the example is situated in the notion of blight. Y'all know what blight is? Blight's when they let an area go down in property values. There's lots of ways that they make blight with gentrification, and it pushes people out. There's a bajillion ways that they do blight. But for me to teach you today is this. Can you see the rent sign? This whole area has not had any renters, and it's near some residential areas. So let's break it down. The long-term problem is that this is blighty. It's just not cool looking. San Marcos is cool, and you got all these signs. The short term, the city's also losing revenue, right? When you've got people spending money in a community, that helps build up all sorts of economic, the economy. It helps with the budget. So that would be long-term, short-term. You could also talk about, that's about all I can think about. Let's see. Attitude, structural barrier. I guess in terms of quantitative, qualitative, you could talk about how many years this area has been sitting with blight, with nothing going on. Or you could talk about, in the short term, just how bad it makes the city look. When out-of-towners come and check out our cool town and they see this silly looking apartment complex that's just sitting here. There could be like Alamo Draft House, which is one thing they talked about, but it never came to fruition. All right, y'all, here's another example that really fires me up. Is this one downtown. This is a piece of property that used to have a restaurant on it. And in fact, I did an open records request. They told me there was not asbestos in there, but then once I got my open records, there was. So this thing, y'all, I'm going to show you. The river is on the right on the other side. So they demolished this thing and they want to build a 9-story building. A 9-story building. And if you can see, I'll show you how close this is to the river. It's just on the other side. Okay, if you can see that big hole down there, that's where the river is. So let's break it down again. What is the short-term and long-term effects? Well, proponents may say in the short term, we'd have more housing at this 9-story building. Or they may say in the long term, this would provide a wonderful building for us to look at downtown, which all of us think is wrong because we like short buildings because we're a historic downtown. Now, let's think of what the other people who are river lovers would say. They'd say, well, number one, in the short term, you're ruining the print of the city because you're putting a 9-story building when clearly nowhere in town is there a 9-story building downtown. But they could talk about the long-term implications of what? Let's think. What's on the other side of that pole? That's right, the river's on the other side of the pole. So think about having a 9-story building with all of those little toilets flushes. That's sewage. How close it is to the river. The other thing y'all may not know that I know is that on the other side here, actually 20 feet away, is a perk plume, tetrahydrochloroethylene. It's a common degreaser used by people who do clothes things, and it was dumped literally right around the corner. There's a area that I got cleaned up from calling them in. If you dig down into this thing so far down, you're gonna tap that other plume. And so now that toxic waste plume can now work its way to the river. And I've been following the road construction, y'all. Over the long term, that plume has changed when they did all of these street improvements. So maybe in the short term, we got some new roads, but in the long term, a toxic waste plume underneath our city is getting larger. The other funny thing, while we're talking about that, the road construction, in the long term, yes, we may have a new road. Unfortunately, y'all, they built the streets too narrow. The fire department can't come down the streets. So now they're gonna have to redo all these streets. So what's the long-term implication? Think about it. Money. It's gonna cost the taxpayers more money for those roads to be fixed. And that's also a quantitative notion because you can quantify how many more hundreds of thousands of dollars we're gonna have to rip up the street and fix it. On a qualitative level, it's just wrong to spend taxpayer money because in the corporate America, they would never, or higher ed for that matter, they would never allow you to waste so much money. Hey y'all, remember when we were talking about the smart meters? When I used that example, that's a smart meter. It's really a dumb meter, but they call it a smart meter. Remember when we talked about that in class? Here's my trees, by the way. We talked about long-term versus short-term health implications, that you can get sick immediately upon being exposed to these. And remember I said they're like chicken pot pies, they cook you. So over a period of many years, your health is impacted. We also talked about the structural barrier, which are the ordinances that create these smart meters, but we also talked about the solution to that in the short term, which was the city of Austin that has an opt-out meter program. Now remember, that's also attitudinal inherency, because most people don't even know it's a problem to have a smart meter. People may know about gun control problems or mental health problems, regardless of which side you're on, but this is one of those strange issues that the public is not aware of. Let's see, quantitative, qualitative, you could say how human health is impacted, and that's wrong. To be fried like a chicken pot pie in your own home, or you can quantify how many people get sick from being radiated from electrical utility companies. Hey y'all, this is that restaurant I was telling you about with the human trafficking, because I know some of y'all's topics are about human trafficking. And I just wanted to say, if you're going to break down human trafficking, you would look at things like quantifying the number of people who are kidnapped each year, quantifying the different work sectors they put them in, not just prostitution, but horrible, horrible conditions of restaurant work. We can quantify which countries they come from. Okay, y'all, this is the restaurant I was telling you about with the human trafficking issues that we discussed in lecture. So we know we can quantify how many people are kidnapped. We can even break it down by country. We can even break it down by percentage of different countries. We can even talk about how many people are in prison when they get busted for being human traffickers. We could talk about the dollar amounts that businesses make off of people being human trafficked. But we can't quantify how someone's life has been ruined once they've been kidnapped. That would be qualitative. Quantitative is all of the data. Talk about the long-term effects on those who are victims of human trafficking. We could also talk about the short-term effects of being tortured. Then we could talk about the structural rules or laws against human trafficking, but as well as attitudes. Maybe people aren't aware that it's occurring. Were you aware that there's human trafficking occurring here? Probably not. These team-building concepts not only apply to policy issues, but you can even use them for practical, kind of real-world things. Let's say you're writing a speech, not doing a policy thing, but in the future when you're working on your speeches about diet. I don't know, y'all know I'm all about the gluten-free. So you can talk about the long-term impacts of eating a diet which is rich in gluten and how that may affect your heart or your digestive system. For some people it even makes your brain kind of foggy, like the beer does. Or you could talk about the short-term impacts, about how good you feel and don't have that immediate carb crash. The other thing you could talk about are attitudes. Maybe you grew up. Remember the speech I talked about? That student grew up in an Italian family, and so bread is very much part of their culture. Sometimes it's a structural issue. It's really expensive to eat gluten-free. Have you guys seen how expensive those gluten-free products are? So anyway, just a couple of real-world examples. And then quantitative and qualitative. For qualitative, I know, isn't this great? I'm going through the store making a video for you guys. Qualitative, you could talk about how in and of itself it's bad to eat things that are bad for you, but you could also quantify it by your heart rate, right? Your cholesterol levels. Maybe there's some other blood work that you would get tested. Okay, I better shut it off now. Just so y'all know, I could have gotten into trouble for doing that. We're not supposed to record in the HEB, but one of the cool clerks told me that one of the video bloggers started, he was a gamer and the public demanded more, so he started videoing himself in the grocery store. So there you go, y'all. Consider this my own video blog to the Saturday class. All right, I gotta go give this guy a card now. He wants to see my blog. Hey y'all, that about sums it up. So remember, the problem can be long-term and short-term, the way you break it down. But you should also talk about how your solution addresses both of those long-term and short-term issues. The problem can also be caused by attitudes, i.e. not knowing it's a problem, or you just don't care it's a problem, or you like the fact that it's a problem. Or it could be structural. That could be a law, some sort of ordinance or a policy. Or we can have quantitative, which we can use through data, or qualitative, which are things like rights, liberty, things like that. This development back here, guys, can you see it? See it? That, they dug so far deep into the ground, I could not even bear to take photos. And I know there were artifacts over there. So qualitative, that would be the artifacts, how far down they dug, and the implications it may have on the aquifer. That would be qualitative because it's not good to pollute, but you could also talk about how much water is being impacted. Okay, I hope that gave y'all some ideas to help write your paragraphs for that assignment, because our class was canceled due to the weather on Saturday, and I'm glad I did this because now all the future classes can use this as well. Holla, y'all have a wonderful week. Peace out, Saturday class. By the way, y'all, these examples do not reflect ACC nor ACC Speech Department nor my own all opinions, because I'm just giving you examples off the top of my head from my town. So let's just keep that in mind as well, just for jocularity's sake. All right.